You just know a character is bad as hell when your introduction to them is as a convict on the run rushing into battle. The poison-wielding Ryuko Yanagi is all things toxic and quite literally. He won't give up because he's a warrior and he won't let you tap out of a fight easy. Call him cold or apathetic, Yanagi's fights tend to be edge-of-your-seat thrillers. He fights with vigor and has a never-back-down attitude, with his poison hand becoming the stuff of legends in the Baki universe. But is it enough to defeat Baki himself? Is it adequate to beat up Yujiro's pride? Or does it lead to his downfall and eventual death? Today, we're gonna uncover the mysteries behind Yanagi's background as an evil death row convict on the run, as well as his physiology and how he's able to poison his enemies with such ease. Who is Ryuko Yanagi? Why was he imprisoned? Ryuko Yanagi's backstory is shrouded in mystery. At best, we know that he is notorious for his cold-hearted apathy towards people. He's introduced as a captured criminal, but as for his crimes, even those are kept a secret. However, Yanagi is not put on death row simply for his crimes. He was charged with killing his fellow inmates. Yanagi would use other inmates to perfect his vacuum hand technique. Using this technique, Yanagi also broke apart the glass chamber prison that was holding him and made his escape to Tokyo. He had been a pupil of Kunimatsu, a sensei at the Japan Martial Arts Association, and he specializes in assassination and deadly hand techniques. Yanagi's history with his master, Kunimatsu, can be a good case study of this cold and evolved fighter as we know him today. He trained under his master to learn Kudo, the way of the void martial arts. His poison hand technique is a part of this martial arts form. Kunimatsu appears as an aged sensei to Yanagi and is a highly respected hand-to-hand combat defense expert. Yanagi was taught the poison hand technique by Kunimatsu, and for a mysterious reason, Yanagi is the only major Japanese person to be trained by this particular master. Kunimatsu and Yanagi share a complicated relationship, and to a large extent, Kunimatsu is aware that his student can use the poison hand technique on him as well. Yanagi, for his part, is one of the few students of Kunimatsu who could successfully complete the ritual of getting the poison hand technique. Once Yanagi perfected the poison hand technique, his master went so far as chopping off his own left hand because he suspected that Yanagi could kill him with the poisonous technique he taught this most evil death row convict. With the vacuum palm and whip strike technique, Yanagi can be as deadly as a rattlesnake. He doesn't just fight to win, he wants to taste defeat, but he'll never back down. He is morally lost in a tug-of-war between his desire to keep winning and also wanting to taste defeat, and this makes him extremely lethal in the Baki universe. How physically durable and versatile is Yanagi as a fighter? Yanagi is not your average hardened criminal that you'd meet on the street. Counting him amongst average street fighters would be a mistake. While there are many physically strong and capable fighters in Baki, Yanagi is a mix of both physical power and weaponry. Let's first try to understand his physical durability and resilience. He tried to overcome the agony and the possibility of death attributed to achieving the poison hand technique. The poison hand technique is not for the faint-hearted to achieve. It is not so much a scientific procedure like Jack Hanma using the X4 special drug. It has a somewhat equal level of life risk, if not as evident as the X4 drug. But the fact that he survives this transformation and inflicts immeasurable pain tells us a lot about his own resilience to the toxic poisons in his hand. His body is highly resistant to the effect of the toxins in his hand, to the point that he's not affected by them and he can easily survive the ordeal. Imagine a man who has willfully exposed himself to radiation and still has no signs of radiation sickness. Yanagi is similar to this, but with a good level of resistance to his own poisonous hand. Now, if we assess his body's physical strength in fights, Yanagi is an ace at bouncing back. He refuses to be grounded by any of his opponents. He can just be back on his feet in an instant or simply keep fighting throughout. A fighter with a truly never back down attitude, this short, middle-aged convict on the run has an illustrious record in the Baki series. Yanagi has quickly recovered and fought back after he was slammed ruthlessly by Shibukawa. As for his third infamous skill, Yanagi really settled some scores with Baki by using his whip strike technique. How can we forget that moment when his sword jammed through his right thigh and he barely flinched in the process? And as for the most brutal attacks he's endured, Morobe was alone responsible for tearing his jaw in half with a Kusarigama strike. If this sounds somewhat bearable to you, then you should know that Yanagi never lost consciousness even after Morobe chopped his arm off. Speed is another advantage that Yanagi can use to turn the tide of a fight. While he might not not be the fastest fighter in the Baki canon, he has some pretty cool achievements to his name. He has consistently shown that he can be the fastest in the room, barely allowing his opponents to react during an attack. Yanagi was able to do this twice with Baki. Once, he landed a kick on Baki while he was just flinching. Second, he hit Baki with a whip strike before he could even react to his assaults. Most importantly, Kazue couldn't see Yanagi's hands move when he assaulted him with relentless strikes. Yanagi is swift, quick to react, and his reflexes also add to this ability a lot. His reflexes allow him to use the right maneuver for the most damaging strikes. For example, if we consider his previously mentioned kick to Baki, Yanagi simply kicked Baki to the floor, and he also launched Hector Doyle into the air with a strike as if he just flung a doll out of nowhere. His reflexes, combined with his speed, allowed him to stop Baki's strike, and that's extremely commendable. After all, stopping the assault of a top-tier fighter isn't a normal thing in the Baki universe. Grip is also an essential factor that makes Yanagi a formidable challenge to navigate. Using his grip with a combination of his skill, he is able to break normal locks, latch onto his opponents, and even break barriers. His whip strikes are particularly effective with a combination of his grip and his physical strength working together. It can also tear off flesh while Yanagi's on his game. Lastly, in Yanagi's arsenal of strengths comes his rampant usage of weapons. Yanagi is notorious for using weapons to aid his martial art of the Way of the Void. He's used these weapons in a variety of ways to fight and overpower major martial artists like Baki and Shibukawa. Yanagi's weapons range from katanas and karma as well as boiling water. Yanagi is perhaps the most well-remembered for using a repository of handy weapons on Shibukawa. He has thrown boiling water at Shibukawa to declare that he lost thrice, and this was done to mostly insult the man. He has also used the antique Indian weapon called Bog Knock, which translates to the tiger's claws. Lodged in the palm of his hand, he was able to inflict considerable damage on Shibukawa. He went so far as using a karate belt to choke Hector Doyle and also cut him using a swing of his katana. Using his vacuum palm technique, Yanagi was able to break through many objects, and with his overall physical strengths, the vacuum palm deserves to be on the top spot of Baki techniques. Let's take a closer look at it. What is Yanagi's vacuum hand technique? How does it turn oxygen into poison? The Baki series is home to some of the fiercest fighters, and each one has a unique technique or ability. But when Yanagi defeats his opponents, he has a catchphrase that he uses before knocking down his enemies. Yanagi asks, "Do you know what's the most poisonous gas?" Let's take a look at the answer. It's actually oxygen. Kinda confusing, right? Well, Yanagi is called the Poisoner in the Baki series, but he doesn't really poison people with oxygen. In fact, he flips the usage of oxygen in his opponent's body, and therefore it becomes ironically poisonous. All of this is possible with his The Way of the Void martial art, and its use of the vacuum palm technique. This skill creates a suction-type area in the center of Yanagi's palm. The oxygen level in this palm center is regarded to be around only 6%. This oxygen level is very small compared to the amount needed by a human being. If Yanagi uses this technique and places his palm on the nose or mouth of his opponent, it's a surefire way to knock that opponent unconscious. Lack of oxygen is one attack that no fighter in Baki would be immune to, unless their speed tops the speed limits of Yanagi. He has mastered this technique, and mind you, it's not an easy one to engage in. The highest level of this skill comes from creating a suction strong enough that a piece of paper will stay stuck to your palm. He has famously used this technique in every major event of his life. From jailbreaking out of a rocket-proof glass chamber to attempting it on Baki, there is only disaster written all over Yanagi's hands. While there are examples of convicts who got a pretty good fight out of him, Yanagi deteriorating Baki's condition in their first encounter was enough proof that he was the strongest threat to him. In his first fight with Baki, we see a good demonstration of this technique. While Baki is still processing Yanagi's moves, he could simply suck out the oxygen from the hands of Baki's body for starters. And before Baki even realizes it, Yanagi placed his vacuum palm on his nostrils to lower the oxygen supply to a mere 6%, as we discussed just moments ago. The vacuum palm technique works similarly to a plunger that sucks the excess out of things. The only difference with Yanagi's skill comes with practically cutting off oxygen and knocking out the opponent. Well, an unconscious opponent is as good as no opponent at all, but before he could reach out to Baki and give him a taste of this technique, he had used it on a number of prison inmates. Precisely the reason for Yanagi to be on death row. He also blasts off a concrete wall to demonstrate the extent of this skill after knocking out Baki. Well, we know our fighters love to show off in this series. Yet, is this even possible in real life? It's hardly possible to blast walls with vacuum palms, but we wouldn't know that for sure. When we call him Yanagi the Poisoner, we're playing with the idea of how oxygen is a vital life source, but cutting it off can maybe become the human body's biggest poison. The venom here acts from simply depriving opponents of oxygen to finish the fight in one swift stroke of Yanagi's hands. What doesn't kill you can make you unconscious, and Yanagi can be the greatest enemy in this regard for Baki. How did Yanagi develop his poison hand? How does it affect his enemies? The poison hand technique mastered by Yanagi requires a person to jab their hand into an extremely lethal and powerful concoction of poisons. This lethal dosage of poisons would be difficult for anyone, even those with a resistance to poison. Most people would simply collapse if they dipped their hands into this mixture, let alone using it later on to deliver poisons with their attacks. Yanagi's poison hand is the result of a strenuous special ritual that has been in practice for generations. However, it's no easy feat to get the poison hand. In order to achieve the correct amount of toxins in the hand, he had to create a mixture of venom extracted from dangerous plants and insects. The proportions have to be exact, as any excess amount could lead to an overdose type effect, with symptoms ranging from poisoning nerves, rotting organs, bone deterioration, and even blindness. Once Yanagi created the right toxic mixture, he poured this concoction into a vase filled with sand. Next, the sand acts the same way as a punching bag. Only thing different about it is that the sand is full of poisons that Yanagi would be jabbing at. The sand absorbs the poisons that were created by Yanagi and was then used for 5 days in a row. For those 5 days, Yanagi jabbed at the sand to absorb the venom from it, one day at a time. Simply dipping his hands in the sand would attack his nerves in one go and even give him blindness. Yanagi used this potency to turn Hector Doyle blind in their fight, but simply punching the sand for 5 consecutive days isn't the end of this ritual. During the day, in intervals of every 7 minutes, he had to dip his hand into an antidote to abate the symptoms of extreme poisoning. During the night, the hand is dipped for 9 minutes in this same antidote. While many do not make it to the end of the 5-day jabbing ritual, Yanagi did. Unlike Yanagi, many would rather chop their hands off than endure the pain of the venom. It acts very fast, but Yanagi was successful in surviving and completing this ritual. At the end of the ritual, his hand had swollen and turned into the color of a sweet potato. This stage indicates that the venom has successfully lodged in his hand to the appropriate level, just enough that it doesn't kill Yanagi in the process or in the future. Now let's come to its use and effects in a fight. Yanagi has done considerable damage to many fighters with the use of his poison hand. It's extremely lethal, and a simple cut can administer the venom all the way to the opponent's nerves. The result is a highly painful shutdown of the body and its organs. There are 2 separate variants of the toxic venom used in the ritual of the poison hand. The one used by Yanagi is the Yin variant, and its recipe was developed by the Japanese. The ritual was originally Chinese craftsmanship, therefore, the Chinese variant is called the Yang variant. Yanagi's Yin variant had nearly killed Baki with its cuts, as Baki became increasingly sick, skinny, weak, and his strength drained from his body. Baki was constantly coughing up blood and was in no position to fight in the series. This poison hand skill has rattled others like Kuroha Shinogi and Reichi Ando as well. They were not able to create an antidote to the effects of Yanagi's poison hand. If anything, this proves why Yanagi becomes the greatest threat to Baki. While Baki may be a powerhouse of physical and technical expertise, Yanagi's methods are unconventional and unseen, even for our hero. But how effectively does the poison hand work? What impact does it have on its victims? Well, the logic at work here is using a partially toxic part of your body to inflict a highly lethal wound that has no antidote. Ask Kuroha Shinogi and Reichi Ando. To take a page out of other anime characters with similar abilities, let's talk about Sesshomaru from Inuyasha and his demonic use of the Dokaso or the poison claw. Sesshomaru has venom-filled nails that he can use to inject poisonous acids into his victims. Even demonic beings aren't immune to the acidic nature of this venom, and it can straight up melt your bones. Sesshomaru uses these poison claws in fights to repress his enemies. Furthermore, he can go a step past Yanagi to make the poison travel to other parts of his body based on the requirement of the fight. Choso and Kichizu from Jujutsu Kaisen also have a similar poison-led technique. While Choso's blood is poisonous and can drain his victim's stamina and strength, Kichizu can paint your body with beautiful floral patterns that only induce the traumatic experience of absorbing his venom-dripping blood. Choso or Kichizu, the agony will make you want to throw up, and worst case scenario, you're probably going to die. Yanagi therefore has one of the most lethal weapons in the Baki-verse in the palm of his hand. Pun very much intended. How can Yanagis Slaps tear off flesh? Is this humanly possible? We've often seen people lose teeth due to a slap, but Yanagi can take it 2 steps forward by also scraping off the flesh from his opponent's body. This would be a huge benchmark in the infamous slapfest competitions that we often see happening in the real world. But for Yanagi, slapping and flaying Baki in the process is another one of his ace techniques. When Baki and Yanagi go head-to-head for an informal fight to settle scores, Yanagi realizes that Baki has lost his boyish youthfulness. He has become a more mature and hardened fighter. This shows in the start of the fight when Baki amazes Yanagi with his dexterity and speed. However, Yanagi is not the kind of fighter who will watch and stay dazed and confused. So what follows is the Baki version of an insanely quick and terrorizing slap assault. Yanagi doesn't stop, nor can Baki keep track of his slaps. In the process, Yanagi slaps off huge chunks of skin and flesh from Baki's arms, shoulders, and legs. Now, tearing the flesh off a person's body with just a slap is no ordinary task for a human being. The flexibility, force, and speed required for this feat is immeasurable. This slapping skill also becomes 2 times more lethal because Yanagi has a poison hand. So 2 + 2 = nasty, and slapping of flesh with a poisonous hand helps Yanagi induce toxic poisons into Baki's body, not just once, but almost thrice over. This move amplifies the use of the poison hand by acting on the wounds and creating infections, and then slipping the venom deeper into the muscles of Yanagi's opponents. Baki surviving this slap assault is a miracle in and of itself, but the other fighters in Baki, it's highly possible they'll crumble under the combined force of the slap and the poisoned hand. So, the moral of the story is that you never want to be slapped by Yanagi. Does Yanagi survive his brutalization by Yujiro? Is he alive in the series? Will he return? The question everyone has had for the longest time is whether or not Yanagi survived Yujiro's onslaught in the end. Is Yanagi alive? Did he survive his merciless defeat at the hands of Yujiro? Will he come back to the main Baki series? Well, the answers to these questions aren't so simple. If we look back at Yanagi's end, he was fighting Motobe in a park, and he could have had a fighting chance at defeating him, but Yujiro intervened. Motobe has done all the damage a fighter could do to Yanagi, including chopping off his arm and implanting his katana in Yanagi's thigh. But even that's not enough to put down Yanagi, as he tries to make a comeback. And it's precisely at this moment that Yujiro interrupts and stands behind Motobe like a towering giant. While Motobe tries to make his last stand, he instead attacks Yujiro and fails. Yujiro stops Motobe's katana and starts snapping it with his fingers, much to Yanagi's surprise. While Yanagi is bleeding out, he respectfully addresses Yujiro and tells him that everyone knows him as the strongest creature on Earth, but he has no right to decide the end of a fight. And of course, Yujiro is not one to take a slap to his ego. We see Yujiro make a monologue about combat ethics and what it means to really lose. He is precisely talking about Yanagi's Bushido warrior ethic. A Bushido warrior will never give up as long as they are still breathing. The only way a Bushido warrior loses is by dying in combat. Even though Yujiro practically offers Yanagi the chance to give up the fight, Yanagi doesn't budge from his position. So, the ogre states that he is leaving for home, and he does what he does best. He delivers one surprise final move that splits and shreds Yanagi's face, finally putting him down. Yanagi, for all intents and purposes, should die from such an assault, but he doesn't. In the Baki Revenge Tokyo spin-off series, it's revealed that he is alive and escaped from this encounter. His body was shown to be held together, covered in an acrylic mask and bound by iron hooks. And he also managed to escape just like he did before. Yanagi is hands down the most dreaded escaped convict fighter in Baki. If he can drain the oxygen from your body, you should be convinced about this, or else you risk ingesting a poison 10 times worse than anything you've ever imagined. His slaps will give any fighter nightmares that'll last a lifetime, all thanks to the combined use of his poison hand and vacuum palm technique. Overall, Yanagi is alive in the Baki universe, but it is unlikely that this escaped convict will make another appearance in the Baki main storyline. The creators of Baki are not so keen on reviving Yanagi and making him do a comeback, as his storyline has sort of stalled out in the Baki Revenge Tokyo spin-off. Marvelous verdict. Now, for the marvelous verdict, we would suggest it's best to stay out of the way of Ryoko Yanagi because there's nothing marvelous about getting into a fight with him. Yanagi's poison-infused physiology makes him the most lethal fighter, and the one with the strongest grip thanks to his vacuum palm technique. Besides, you don't want to be in a position where you'll have your body rotting from the inside because of a poisonous cocktail. But on a side note, Ryoko Yanagi would surely make an excellent bodyguard.